Hi everyone, this is Mark Freestead with today's Daily Hope from Hebrews chapter 4. I want you to imagine just for a second that it is your job to offer sacrifice for the sins of the entire world, and you have to do it every single day. Now, I want you to imagine the pressure and also the prestige and privilege of day one. You would probably feel the weight of that. Wow, this is a big, important job. But what about day 51 or day 500? Do you suppose that the uniqueness and the specialness of offering that would just kind of blur together to the point where you're not even personally invested in whose sins you're offering sacrifice for? It's just a routine again and again and again. Well, in the book of Hebrews, sometimes they talk about Jesus' position as prophet, priest, and king. Prophet, priest, and king. Hebrews is especially focused on his role as the priest. And we read in verse 15 of chapter 4, we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. There's something special about that I'll come back to in just a moment. In Martin Luther's time, Martin Luther led the Protestant Reformation. There was a lot of corruption among the Catholic priests. There were people who were priests who had no business being priests and no real interest in being priests. And they would take things like the communion wine and they would just drink it for pleasure. Whatever you think of Catholicism, that's a profanity. It's a blasphemy to treat special sacred things in an ordinary way. And so in Martin Luther's time, he said, this is not good. These people's hearts are not in it. And so you can imagine that if it was your job day after day to just offer sacrifices for people's sins, well, it would become a little old after a while. And maybe just the trappings of the office and the specialness would become dull even to you. Now listen to what verse 14 says. It says, we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God. So let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. So these two verses are important side by side. Verse 14, we've got a high priest who has been in heaven. He is Jesus. He's the Son of God. He's not an ordinary person. Yet verse 15, he's not so far distant from us that he can't understand our weaknesses of the human condition, but he was human himself. He was tempted in every way, yet, this is important, he did not sin. So think of it this way, that Jesus is the ultimate realist. He understands the human condition. He also understands the perfection and the holiness of God, and he's got to hold both of those in tension. He does not ignore the damage that our sin does. I've got a son who's 6 years old, and sometimes when he's frustrated with me saying no to him, he will say, I want to get a dad who will just let me do whatever I want to. And I'll say to him, if I let you do whatever you wanted to, it would actually mean that I didn't love you. Well, that response frustrates him. He doesn't want to hear that. But that's true. I understand why it's tempting to play with dad's tools and tempting to get into things that he ought not to get into, but I also understand how damaging that can be for him. And so sometimes people say, well, if Jesus understands what we're going through, why doesn't he just shrug his shoulders and just forgive everybody? And it's because he understands the gravity and the weight of our sin. He understands it is a hard thing to be human, but he's not going to turn a blind eye to the damage that sin does. He's the ultimate realist. So he balances the seriousness of sin with our brokenness. And through that, because he's been there in a position of weakness and temptation, he offers to you and me forgiveness.